Okay, well, on behalf of Four Way Books, I'm so pleased to welcome you to the Four Way Books Symposium. I'm Hannah Matheson, publicist and editor at Four Way, and today we're thrilled to present Rajiv Mohabir's seminar on the life of the indenture trade in the Western Hemisphere. Later today, we'll have Cami Thomas's seminar on gods in the Odyssey. Looking forward, we plan to announce upcoming events very soon for fall 2021 and spring 2022, both in person and virtual as we enter a new phase of COVID vaccinations and hybrid programming. A new series, the Four-Way Book Symposia, began before 2020 when we met in New York City for a discussion of Seamus Heaney's Spirit Level and in Boston for a discussion of Yeats and Intensity. Both sessions, which were facilitated by award-winning poet, scholar, critic, and editor Daniel Tobin. Hi, Dan. Thank you for being here. We hope you'll continue to attend. Yes, and painter and architect. We hope you'll continue to attend and enjoy these events that we so relish ourselves. And while today's event is completely free, as an independent publisher, we always welcome donations. The generosity of our friends and readers makes the work we do possible. In fact, Four Way Books is in its 29th year of publishing award-winning books that have garnered acclaim from the Pulitzer to the Pulitzer, and it ushers work by emerging and established writers into the world. So thank you for being here this year and every year. Martha Rhodes, Ryan Murphy, Sally Ball, and I are so pleased that you're joining us today. And with that, I will let Rajiv take it away.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you, Ryan and Martha, for asking me to be here with you all. Thank you for you all being here on this beautiful Sunday in Boston, and that's where I am right now. I am going to share my screen with you as we talk about Lalbihari, Sharma, and the shape of devotion. It's all theoretical until it happens, I suppose. Here we go. Yes. So what I'm going to talk about today is going to be broken into a couple of let's call them sections, but it'll be probably a little bit more flawless as I go through, crossing my fingers. I've been thinking about this book of poetry called I Even Regret Night, Holi Songs of Demerara, that I've translated, that was originally published in 1916. And one of the things to go into thinking about the kind of devotional poetry that takes shape in this book is to understand a little bit of the background. And so it's going to be a little sociological, historical, that kind of opens up into a kind of devotional poetry that is important or changing or that changed the Caribbean landscape. And so as folks may know, Indian indenture occurred after, in 1834, the British abolished their trade of enslaved people. They then turned their greedy eyes, and I love to say this because the Kohinoor was also called, India was also called the jewel of their crown. They turned their greedy eyes into the jewel of their crown, which was India, which meant that they were able to conscript indentured laborers to go to the Caribbean and to all over the world in their colonies to work the sugarcane plantations for very, very cheap wages, which was something that was not necessarily easy to do for newly emancipated peoples of African descent. And so, let's see, here we go. And so the displaced, through this process where coolies were taken as scab labor, it displaced more than 2.5 million South Asian people into the colonies across the globe, where the people were demeaned on sugarcane plantations and called coolies. And so basically what they did was they repurposed slave ships to be more spacious for the people conscripted, as well as the infrastructures of slavery in their colonies. So the former slave barracks were then used also to house indentured laborers in India. And so from this kind of milieu comes the Holi Songs of Demerara. And here you see a picture of the original book. It was published in 1916 in India, And it's the only first-hand account of Indenture from the Anglophone Caribbean. Now, there is one from Suriname by the poet and memoirist named Munshi Rahman Khan. There's also a book called My Years in Fiji by Bridgelal that was published around the same time as this. And a little bit about this book is that it is written in a language that I am calling Proto-Guyanese Bhojpuri, which is an amalgamation of Northern Indian languages such as Bhojpuri, Awadhi, as well as Urdu and Standard Hindi as we've come to know it. However, Standard Hindi as we've come to know it was an invention taking place in the late 1800s in India with printing and dissemination of all different kinds of literature. The book itself by Sharma is broken up into 3 major sections. And so the first section of this book is about the life on the plantation. And it chronicles the kind of situation that people found themselves in. The second part are what are called chautal songs. And I'll get into a little bit more about what the chautal songs are, because we're going to spend most of our time talking about this. And then the third part are the bhajans, or like prayerful songs. So meaning like you would consider them to be not quite hymns, but praise songs if you are a Protestant. This is how that functions. So the hymns, the traditional hymns we would think of as like being mantras and Vedas, whereas these are, very much devotional poems from the Bhakti movement, which I'm going to unpack a little bit more about what I mean by devotional poetry. Does everybody have a copy of the handout that I sent along? If not, allow me to stop sharing and to drop it, or to drop it into the chat, which will require me to stop sharing for just a second. And I'm going to share the PDF with you, just so you have it, so that you can look at it with me. Here we go. It would be helpful if I labeled things a little bit more accurately. I'm also going to share with you the ending part of my talk today, which is I'm leaving you with a translation prompt in case you are interested in trying your hand at this very thing that I am trying to do here. And so, yes, if you want to read along, then that's cool. I also am sharing it as a slide with the first chaupai, or the first section of these poems. And so this chaupai is a kind of poem that is written in, it's a devotional type of couplet, really explored by the devotional poets. And this one specifically, we're going to look at the kind of historical importance of it before we jump into the actual poem here, or the poetry of it. But I want us to have a little bit of background of what's kind of going on in the background, and the ways in which life in indenture and in exile fold over and merge into Bhakti traditions of Kabir and Mirabai as they emerge and are layered in a new Caribbean iteration. So he says, Lalbihari Sharma says, I want to write a little of Demerara's customs. Listen, this is a country of infinite ills where wisdom is scarce. I left my home and came to Demerara, my name penned as Kuli. Forsaking bhajans, forsaking dharma, the Vedas I abandoned to my disgrace. Of the routines of this Demerara life, I write these kavit, these verses. And so here we see that the poet says the word verse, and the verse here is, and the chaupai structure itself is actually meant for instrumentation. It's meant to be sung and performed. When we see the word kavit here, I write these kavit, these verses. Kavit is the word for poem. So for Lalbihari Sharma, this kind of chaupai, this kind of song is actually serving as a poem that exists in many kinds of, it's many faceted in that it is to be performed as well as read, which is an interesting thing for me as I think about what it means to translate these folk songs or poems come folk songs or folk songs come poems, however it is that we want to imagine this. And so I'm going to read a little bit more to just give you a general kind of feeling of what the timbre of the indentured reverberations were as people sought to live through this kind of economic and exploitation and labor extraction. He goes on to say, in the Covet, which is the next poem, in the section to be sung, as the bell tolls 5, the pot heats on the fire, rice and yogurt boil with sugar. I eat my fill and the Sardar comes to the door, bringing orders we must endure. Washing the pot, I keep the rice. I prepare my chillum pipe to deal with this. Men and women join together, bearing hoes on their shoulders, the way clogged with those who have come to Demerara. I think it would be helpful if I were to say that Demerara is actually in the country of Guyana in South America, that is culturally Caribbean, in that the conversations that happen linguistically and culturally actually reflect the greater archipelago rather than the Latin American space that it shares as it borders Venezuela and Brazil. It also borders Suriname to the east, which is one of the Dutch colonies. So of the countries in South America, Guyana is the only country that currently has English as the first language, as the national language, which is, you know, an interesting thing to think about why, in fact, this is being translated into English and why I feel like kind of this is one of my poetic ancestors and why it's important for me to be like a steward of this. A couple of things that I want to point out in this poem was the fact of the term coolie. So here, coolie, this is an interesting poem sociologically, historically, because this is where we move from, you know, ethnic kinds of delineations that the British had in India to delineate people of various castes or religious practices to now being named for their labor. So like, if you are a Marxist, this is like such a wonderful time to think about the way people interact with one another and how people interact with empire. And as the coolie, as the indentured laborer came, as Lalbihari came to the colony, he forsook his bhajans, the Dharma, his religion, and the Vedas as well. And so what are the things that make somebody Hindu in Hinduism? And this is, you know, not everybody will agree. Hinduism is a practice of great manyness. The Vedas generally are people understand to be sacred. And so what he's saying here is that he is living through a new religion. Excuse me. Wow. But into the Covet again. I'm sorry, I'm being so distracted by the fact that the Covet is not on the page. Actually, you know what? Why don't I do this? That way I can. Oh, I'm sharing the entire screen. Yes.
You were just sharing a document. Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Yay, the Covet. You can see this, yes? Here we go. A fun thing to see about this also is that the way that people dealt with the kind of indenture structure was to smoke from their pipes. And a chillum pipe is typically what people would smoke hashish out of, you know, and so marijuana was a way that people would escape the traumas of colony. And another thing to notice about Lalbihari Sharma here is that, you know, the perspective that he's writing from is from an indentured laborer who is a field worker. Even though Lalbihari Sharma was an indentured laborer, he was not, in fact, a field worker. He was a sardar. He was a driver. So he was one of the people that was, you know, policing the other indentured laborers in this time. And so, you know, as we get here, we learn a little bit more about the condition of Demerara, you know, the physical conditions of it, and how these then function as a window into the affective realities of these laborers and their new ways of coming to their devotional religious tradition. And why bhakti, we'll see why bhakti fits so well here. The last poem from this first section that I will read is the covet of lamentation here. And so Lalbihari Sharma writes, bearing the book, the Sardar reaches the coolies. Inspecting the cane field, he accounts their work. If one does not finish the tasks, he vexes, then garnishes pay. When I witness this, my entire body shakes. In Demerara, there are police stations in every direction. Oh God, where have they taken and forgotten the poor? And like I said, I think this is a necessary thing to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this kind of poetry here, in that this questioning of where are we runs parallel and contrary to the kind of narratives around the indenture trade. People are told that they had more, people in, historians like to say now, that people had more agency than they did once upon a time during the time of enslavement, in that they were able to, after their 5-year contracts were over, to be reconscripted, to be, again, for another 5 years, which would include or conclude at the 10-year mark with return fare to India. Saving up money during this time, despite the promises of the recruiters in India, was in fact impossible. Impossible to do. As you see in this poem, pay is garnished, and that was a pretty regular occurrence. Also, people would spend money in rum shops and in provision stores run by the planters for their indentured laborers. So it was a kind of smoke and mirrors effect that was going on here. So consider this to be the background of the poetry that we are going to go through, as well as the musical tradition, the musical traditions that we're also going to see. As I said, the second part of this book are the chautals. And now chautal is a kind of song or poem that's usually performed during the time of holy celebration, the time of oh yeah, thank you so much, Cecile, for your comment about letting you know the page that I'm on. I'm so sorry. I'll do that moving forward. Thank you so much. As I was saying, the chautal is a kind of musical event that happens during the time of Holi, and it's usually sung by enthusiasts for their own pleasure. And it has, they call it chautal broadly, but it incorporates many various kinds or forms of these different kinds of songs. Chautal is the one that we are going to look at. There's chautal proper, jhumar, ulara, lej, etc., etc. The writing prompt that I have for you is an ulara that I will get to eventually, and that is about repetition and quickness as it moves forward. Now, if you look at this illustration here, or this picture here, this is actually the page of the book itself. That was the copy that I translated from. And now, what is interesting to know here is that the line breaks are not actually delineated in this songbook. What you see is the general, and this is a chaupai here. You see the chaupai structure of the one line followed by the 2 line, and then the number in Devanagari. And that represents the completion of a couplet. And so you see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 couplets in this chaupai. And then we move into what they call a doha, which is another kind of poetic form that is sung during the time of the chautal performance. Now, since it's easy to, and here are some more examples. And here we see, this is an ulara here, what it looks like on the page. This is what the chautal looks like on the original page. As you have my PDF, you'll see the way that I actually, as a translator, have gone to carve up what the poem could look like. this is for your consideration. But one of the things that I think is really important to do is, since this is a performative tradition, is to understand what exactly I mean by Chautal performance. And this is a Chautal performance in which a Chautal goal, as they're called, which means a Chautal circle, sits and performs. And now you'll see in this, these men in yellow shirts, and this used to be once upon a time a tradition practiced by male homosocial space only, but now it's kind of cracked open into anybody being able to. People who are, identify as men, women, and queer folks are also included in this space, which is one of the beautiful things about, this holy tradition. Anyway, this Chautal goal, you see these two lines of people playing the symbols, the hand symbols, and you will see that it's sung in a call and response method. So I'm going to play you just a little clip of this so you get the kind of taste of what the holy songs, the Pagua songs, the Chautal songs are like when they are in motion. And I just wanted to give you a quick taste of what this was like. It's a very happy time. The songs are joyful and exuberant. It's interesting to think about singing about the Indenture ship during this time, which is an interesting thing. And as I said, the Chautal singers sing in two rows that face each other, maybe sometimes in a semicircle, with a dholak drum player at one end, and the lines are sung. And while the melodies are relatively simple, the song undergoes various modulations of rhythm and tempo, alternating between subdued passages and exciting climaxes as we heard the momentum grow. And it's usually sung by enthusiasts for their own pleasure rather than for an audience. So the performance is about the embodied joy of the singer themselves. And like I said, the Chautal is kind of an umbrella term for various species of song, such as the Ulara, the Lej, etc. And so this tradition is being performed less and less in India, and has a stronghold in all of the places that the British took the indentured laborers, such as Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica, Suriname, and the Fiji Islands, as well as South Africa. And then the third diasporas of the Netherlands, of the UK, of Australia, and of course, the United States. And so this is the kind of oeuvre of this new devotional poetry. And so there ends the first kind of section of this talk, where we have a little bit of information about the cultural contexts. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Jessica asks, where was this one recorded? This one, I believe, was recorded in Georgetown, Guyana, which is the capital of the South American country that my parents are from. And so moving into the Bhakti movement, and the Bhakti movement is also known as the devotional, the turn from the Vedic tradition into the devotional, where people were able to move their traditions from being existing only in the upper class priestly strata into their own personal practice of the home. And this emerged from a crisis of faith. In the 1400s and the 1500s, the Hindu temples were being demolished. The Hindu gods were being broken down. And the question arose, does God really live in the temple if it can be destroyed like this? Then emerges what we call the Hindu devotional poetry movement, or the Bhakti poetic movement. And it draws on traditions that are closely associated with this medieval India time period, when writers such as Kabir, Surdas, and Mirabai revolutionized the formalistic, ritualistic practice of the Hindu religion. Like I said, that was enacted by the Brahmins, the upper caste of people, and the priests. And so by the 16th century, when Kabir, who was one of the most famous Bhakti poets, is living and working as a weaver, Hindus were at a crossroads of sorts, their temples being demolished by monotheists from the north. At issue was increasing dissatisfaction with the caste system. The Brahmin or priestly class, the one who were authorized to perform the rituals and sacrifices required for the appeasement of the Vedic gods, often demanded significant fees to perform the ceremonies and prayers necessary to a proper ordering of the world. Without the Brahmins, these ceremonies and prayers would remain incomplete. However, this system was also meant to keep the caste separated. Many non-Brahmins chose to convert to the newly introduced religion of Islam, which taught that it was possible to speak to God without any intermediary. Others, many of them poets, pioneered, that's actually the wrong word to use, excuse me, worked through a new way of relating to God within a Hindu context, within a Hindu cosmology, addressing God as the self, capital S self, or the way that Mirabai does in her poetry, where God becomes the lover. And so this opened up a whole new world of possibility in which there was no need for Brahmins and pundits or temple charlatans. Instead, the querent, the believer, the devotee was able to speak with God for themselves. And in this poetic movement, all caste and religious distinctions were questioned, in that instead of thinking of God as something outside where through prescribed ritual one could attain some kind of enlightenment, rather God was contiguous with the self. And this reflected a lot of the religious ideologies that had come before. And so one of the other anxieties about this new Indo-Caribbean space, or the space of the indentured laborers, was the fact of moving into a place where the priestly traditions had been broken. People who had crossed the oceans lost caste. How then could they maintain a conversation with the divine? The Caribbean opened up a new space for this kind of bhakti questioning to happen. And now in the Hindu devotional poetry movements, there are two general types of devotional poetry. One is called the Nirgun, and as you see here, Nir means without, and Guna means quality or form. Poetry that is dedicated to the formless God, and then Sagun, Saha means with, and Guna means quality and with. So then it becomes the poetry dedicated to the God that indeed has form. And so famous examples of this that I'm going to show you, you've probably come into contact with, are considered very widely to be, the North Indian pillars of these. I mean, we do have South Indian poet saints like Namalvar, Periyalvar, Andal, who are writing in these traditions from as early as the 8th century. These, however, were written in medieval India. And so this poem, To Tonsured Monks and Dreadlocked Rastas, it was translated by the poet and translator and critic, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. And I really love this, and this I got from the Poetry Foundation website. And what I really love about this kind of translation that Mehrotra has is that he updates the language to translate the spirit of Kabir into an iteration that we can understand today, that is how the poem would have originally sounded to the person who sang this poem originally. So he says, to tonsured monks and dreadlocked rastas, to idol worshippers and idol smashers, to fasting Jains and feasting Shaivites, to Vedic pundits and Faber poets, the weaver Kabir sends one message: The noose of death hangs over all. Only Rama's name can save you. Say it now. So this is an example of Nirgun, a Nirgun poem that's dedicated to the god without form. One of the quandaries that you might, one of the larger questions of this kind of poem is the question of Rama. Like, why use the name of Rama? Well, Rama is one of the incarnations of Lord Vishnu. So why use that very Sagun name? Well, for Kabir, Rama is the name of the generic God, of the God within. And so when he says only Rama's name can save you, he means only the name of the God that is in yourself, the name of the God that is in your breath can save you. And that realization is one that happens internally. And you can see that throughout his body of work. And I'll show you an example. And so there's only one example of this kind of Nirgun poetry that I've provided for you that we're gonna look at very quickly. I also wanted to give you an example of a Mira poem, a poem of the Sagun Bhakti tradition, or the poem from the devotional poetry tradition where God does have form. And this is translated by Jane Hirschfield and Robert Bly. I forgot to put his name in the slide. May Bly and the gods of poetry forgive me. But anyway, the necklace. Oh friend, I sit alone while the world weeps. In the palace that held love's pleasure, the abandoned one sits. She who once threaded a necklace of pearls is now stringing tears. He has left me. The night passes while I count stars. When will the hour arrive? This sorrow must end. Kabir says, lifter of mountains, return. I'm going to show you a couple of things in this poem that I find to be significant for this type of bhakti poetry. Here we have the story of Mira, and Mirabai was a princess who married a king. She became a queen, and she had such devotion to Krishna that she considered it to be greater than her devotion to her husband. In some stories, in fact, Mirabai was considered to be married to the murti, to the statue of Krishna that she had in her house. One of the stories of Lord Krishna is that while he grows up in Vrindavan, he falls in love, and he's in love with Radha, who is a cowherd's woman, who he then abandons to go back to the city of his birth, which is Mathura. And this very much happens in the voice of that character, that mythological character, Radha, who's lamenting the loss of her beloved Krishna. So here we see the lover-beloved relationship enacted through the pain and the suffering of exile, of separation. She refers to Krishna as friend. That's one of the things. This, as you'll see, one of the bhavas, one of the emotions of bhakti is that relationship of the friend, as it's iterated here. And so another thing that I want to show here is Mira says, and in the poem before, in fact, this is another thing that we say, the weaver Kabir sends one message, where the poet uses their actual name in the poem. Like, I mean, we see that in the ghazal in English, and if we were to try to do that in other ways, I wonder what folks would think about that, like, reference of the poet as self, if it weren't participating inside of a tradition. This is actually called the mark of the poet, the kabi chhap. Think of it as kind of like the fingerprint, the way that we have like the authority of the author that emerges from these poems. And Mira says, lifter of mountains. This phrase, Mira ke Prabhu Giridhara Nagara, that phrase will appear in almost all of Mirabai's poems. So then you know it is a convention of Mirabai. For Kabir, the weaver Kabir sends one message, Kahata Kabira suno bhai sadho. This exact phrase will appear again and again and again in these poems of these bhakti poets. And so that's one way that we know that we can trust that these poems were in fact authored by the people that they were. Now, as Arvind Krishna Mehrotra says in his kind of discussion here, it's like, do we really know that Kabir is the original poet? Do we really know that Mirabai is the original poet? Or is it their spirit that's being translated? Much in the way of Coleman Barks translating Rumi, right? How it's like the spirit of Rumi that's being captured on the page. Very different in that these are like people of this like religious tradition practicing this religion and everything like that. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 9 forms of devotion, right? There's listening to the ancient text, there's prayer, there's remembering teachings in ancient texts, there's service to the feet. Now this is interesting, the idea of service in general, but service to the feet is something that is worshipful as well as reverent. There's the actual form of worshiping where the household deity is actually, bathed. The deity comes into the house. There's bowing to the divine, which is the Vandana. I actually showed you a page of the songbook, and that was actually the page of Vandana for, Lalbihari Sharma, that bowing to the divine, the Namaskar. There's service, and then there's friendship with the divine. And self-surrender. And now these are just the kind of overall, they're called navratans, like the 9 gems of what bhakti allows space for that the Vedic tradition did not. Now in the poetry, these translate into the different kind of bhavas or the emotional, the emotional or affective essences. And they're the different attitudes that the devotees take according to their individual temperaments to express their devotion to God in some form. And here are just some. There's Shanta, the love of God. And this one is like peaceful, like, the word Shanti comes from this word in Sanskrit. As we saw, there's the attitude of being a servant. So, the poets from the South Indian traditions will have more of this kind of servant approach to thinking about it, particularly Andal and Periyalvar. There's a Sakhya, the attitude of a friend, where, oh dear friend, where have you gone? I miss you so, which also includes space for the erotic love between Radha and Krishna here. And then of course, there's the caring of the mother and the child as we move into that kind of poem, that devotional poem that chronicles actually Krishna as the Makhan Chor, the stealer of butter, and how that is so endearing to us as people to imagine that relationship between a parent or a mother and a naughty child, who she has some idea of as being divine. Does that sound similar to maybe Mary and Jesus? Maybe, perhaps. So, and it's funny because like in this tradition, a lot of people will say, oh yeah, Christianity is a type of bhakti devotion to the incarnation of God known as Jesus. It's capacious enough to hold all of these worldviews. And now, because I'd spent time translating bhakti poetry in Jaipur and Varanasi in India, I quickly realized that Lalbihari Sharma's work had been composed by someone educated in these medieval Indian poetic traditions. And this came as somewhat of a shock to me, because in all of my studies and in my familial stories, I had never known that indentured laborers had been conscripted and come to the colonies with this kind of sophisticated education. For me, this was important because it goes against a lot of misconceptions about my own familial community and the community of the Caribbean largely. Most people believe that those who ended up in indenture were uneducated, duped by the British into working their colonial fields. But while many of those who chose to migrate were in fact illiterate or unable to read and write, the indisputable and published fact of Sharma's songs shows that the situation was far more complicated than these easy narratives. And this is like my own personal story of like that realization, like, oh my goodness, like I'm only ever getting half of this story by reading all of these other kinds of things. You know, these inheritances and the complexity have, you know, largely been lost. Not only are most Indo-Caribbean poetics derived from languages and cultures that are neither in Bhojpuri, Awadhi, or this Caribbean Hindustani Caribbean Bhojpuri, but that the colonial rupture of indentured servitude and the alienation from languages that it led to has meant that the people of the Caribbean have had to rebuild their cultures in English, which was the language of social prestige. As a result, you know, the poetry taught in schools has been that of, you know, the daffodil and other flora and fauna alien to the Caribbean landscape, and also in the South Asian, maybe not the entire South Asian landscape, but the landscape where people were conscripted from indentures, so the Gangetic Plain and, you know, South India. Meanwhile, the meanings of folk songs and the particular customs that they belong to have been viewed as a kind of occult knowledge, one not purported by mainstream religion or cultural values. But, you know, one of the things that Sharma's songs gives us is an alternative way to understand this diasporic experience, as it is from that first person perspective. You know, it's also it also illuminates a religiosity and a sophistication, you know, that I see in his writings that have like amazed me profoundly, and it changed like the landscape of my own poetic imaginary. You know, as I was born in England and raised in the United States, you know, I'd been told my whole life that we've come from a broken tradition, and this book specifically has shown me to my face, you know, that this might not actually be the whole story, as I said. So with this, I want to talk a little bit about the actual poems themselves. And what I'll do is, if you have any questions at all, please do feel free to type it into the comments, or stop me. And so I'll go through a couple poems and I'll show you an example of the way that these poems are in contemporary iteration. And then, you know, we can have any kinds of questions or conversation that you would like. In that, I would be very interested to know to what you see in these poems, because that's one of the that actually brings me to like the point of my translation, or what I think about translation. You know, and here, and you know, these I'm presenting are my translations, and you know, this was the kind of framework that I was using to understand the translations. And this is this idea is from Flesh and Fishblood: Post-Colonialism, Translation and the Vernacular by Subramanian Shankar, who writes, viewing translation as interpretation allows us to acknowledge the limitations of translation without experiencing critical paralysis. Translation as interpretation is never a finished project. Like any kind of interpretation, a translation is never concluded. They will never take the place of the original text, but that does not mean that it cannot, when approached in a historically sensitive manner, effectively and ethically convey for non-native audiences aspects of the original text. This gives me all kinds of space as a translator, and I feel like it allows me like the space of deviation, and you know, not in a necessarily a disrespectful way, but perhaps in a disrespectful way, perhaps in a way that Kabir is translated by Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, or in the ways that Jane Hirschfield and Robert Bly work together to bring Mirabai into you know, the poetic landscape of the United States. And so this also lets me think of every single translation that I present to be just one particular iteration of the actual text, which, to my great joy, you know, this book comes to us bilingually, and you know, that allows me to say to you as the audience, I really invite the kind of retranslation of this work, you know, and that was very important to me, to have the original cast next to the English, because one, it allowed me, like, you know, a little bit more space in terms of thinking of emanation, as well as interpretation, as well as opening up the possibility for conversation, because what is better for the health of the text than to have the translations be contested. I mean, you can contest it, but like maybe not right now. You maybe, okay, yes, you can, of course, of course. But here, what we'll do is I'll read you this one poem, and I'll show you what I see, and then we'll move into the next poem, and I'll show you a kind of re-singing. That last slide that I ended on that we didn't actually get to will be for the next poem here. So in this chautal, which is it's supposed to be performed in exuberance, we get. In the forest, the papiha bird's epics stave off sleep. It's at midnight, separation from my love torments me. Without him, I have no peace. My youth wastes. Pagun is supposed to be a blissful month. But without Krishna, how can I enjoy it? Should the day breeze blow, it's blistering. I even regret night. All my friends gather to compose chautal songs, knocking drums. A beard in the hands and colored water, my pain wakes. What fate that I take such a ruinous life and squander it? Lalbihari says, fair one, with peace comes happiness. What I see here is I see a poem that is in the tradition of the Sagun poem, that of the devotional poem to the god with form that exists in the Sakya kind of motion of the bhava, where the emotional or the affective experience here is one of the lost friend, one of the lost lover. And here we have that separation, which really colors that idea here. And then in the last part of it, we see the Kavi Chap again, the mark of the poet Lalbihari Sharma. And it's interesting to see this here. Lalbihari could mean many, many different things. And come to find out, upon the meeting of the relatives and descendants of this poet, who actually currently live in the Greater Toronto area, that Lalbihari was not actually his name. His name was Rash Bihari. His poet name, his stage name, or pen nom de plume was Lalbihari. And so Lalbihari is also kind of a pun. Lal, what in Hindi and Awadhi, well, it certainly means red. Red is considered the color of auspiciousness. Lal also means my beloved one. Bihari means the state or belonging to the state of Bihar in India, which Rash Bihari, which Lalbihari as a poet was from that state Bihar. It also is one of the names of Krishna. So the name Lalbihari was so well chosen that it means the beloved of Krishna, the beloved of Bihar, the red one of Bihar, or Krishna's red, and Krishna's redness. And so Krishna's palms are actually depicted as being red, as are the soles of his feet. So the devotion to the feet, and all of these things are like they operate in this like vast complexity here. And this is one of the things that I'll show you here. All of these chautal songs, like I said, happen in the month of what the poet calls Pagun. In Bhojpuri today we'll know it as Falgun, and or Palgun, and in Hindi Falgun. This is the time of Holi, known in Bhojpuri and in the Caribbean as Pagwa, meaning that celebration of the month of Pag. And so here you can see the title line of the entire collection, that which was an interesting thing, as this is my first book of translation, that I've come to realize that the name, while it literally means Holi Songs of Demerara, with this like other kind of poetic flourish, as somebody who is changing and adapting these songs into their new iteration, it allows this kind of space in the title too, and I love that kind of what feels almost like transgression. Now here is the chautal, and like me as a poet, experimenting with the new discursive space of the page as performance, as well as the kind of flexibility of a three-dimensional translation. There's also another kind of translation that's come about, and this was through the recovery efforts of the Guyana-based poet, the Guyana-based singer, Amar Ramesar. I see a question by Jonathan. How did Kabir, Mirabai, and Lalbihari conceive of the audience for their poems? Or did they think of their work as a more private expression? This is a really good question because of the nature of Bhakti poetry, the devotional poem. It does kind of feel as that private thing that happens. What I understand it as, and trust, and I am experiencing this, and I am understanding this through my lens as somebody who has been completely educated in the United States, except for a couple of years in India. I see that, and definitely in poetry as well, in both of those places, what I see is what Li Young Lee would call the address of the daemon, whereas the poet sits and addresses the daemon and the audience overhears. So that shows a little bit of intentionality with Kabir and Mira. However, they did eventually, Kabir for sure, eventually did have disciples that he would, as he would weave, on a loom, on a hand loom, his disciples would listen to what he was saying and they would repeat it. And so as it was written down, it was never written down on paper. It was written down on the hearts and minds of the devotees, which is an interesting thing, an interesting way of thinking. People tend to imagine that the human mind is incapable of that kind of holding on to poetic structure and form, but one of the astounding features of the human mind, we're finding all new kinds of things every single day, is the fact that we are able to understand and remember vast texts. Like the Quran is, folks are able to memorize from the beginning, Bismillah, all the way to the final surah of the Quran. The Vedas similarly were memorized through this kind of ritual recitation, with such incredible precision that, this is also kind of that. Lalbihari, however, wrote his things down before they were performed. So Lalbihari had a very different understanding of his audience. He wanted his audience very much to be singers of Chautal goals. He wanted those people who, we saw in those two lines, to be the people who experienced this. And so this was meant for community participation. So this, in effect, was for Lalbihari, and for Lalbihari wrote it for everyone as a way of maintaining or being a custodian of this tradition. That's such an excellent question because the oeuvres are completely different. Given, the space of audience, the conceiving of audience is completely different given the different kinds of spaces. Which then brings us into this new kind of production here. And the audience for this space is actually people who have access to computers and YouTube. As this song was recorded by the Guyana-based, or who was based in Guyana at the time, singer named Amar Ramesar. And this is the song, Sakhi Utikar. And this is the next chautal that you have, Sakhi, as soon as I wake. And so what he does here is he reimagines the chautal song, not in the general stock chautal musical renditions, but he changes it to a semi-classical Hindustani song tradition based on a particular raga. Which raga it is, I am not certain, and I'm sorry that I don't know this. Here's his email address if you're interested. And I will share this information with you in the chat in just a bit. But let's get a listen to this song and the way that it also has been translated to the digital age.
Sagama pagama re sa ni dha ni da pa dha ni ni sa sakhi uthi kar shringar basant jay sakhi uthi kar shringar बसंत जाए बाजू बंद कंगन बाल सोहे अंगुरिंद नूपुर भाए सखी उठी कर श्रृंगार बसंत जाए.
And just to get a little bit of the sound of this reiteration into the atmosphere, I think is moving to me. And to see those images of Indenture too, like it does something to me. You know, that's of course a part of my own affective reservoir. Thinking of my own ancestors going through this is something. And here's the translation. I'm going to read the translation, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about what I see. What I see here. And this is on page number 99. And of the handout, it's on page 9, or the PDF that you can download here. Sakhi. And Sakhi is the word for friends. But Sakha means a friend who is a man, and Sakhi is a friend who's a woman. Sakhi. As soon as I wake, I dress as spring, with armlets, bangles, and rings. The necklace around my throat gleams like my forehead's bindi. I sit on the bed and call, Pia, Pia. Don't tell me any news of him. Don't tell me I've wasted my life. My blouse bursts. My whole body aches for him. This distance between us I cannot bear. I am lost. The papiha bird cries, Pia, Pia. Hearing this unstitches me. Lalbihari. Peace, peace. You know, so what we see here is that we relate, or the poet is relating stories of the god Krishna and Radha in this time of separation with one another. And I think that this dives deep into that psychic realm of indentureship. For example, in this Chautal, you know, the speaker speaks from the voice of Radha, or Krishna's consort, as she waits for him to return, right? Like from abroad, Pia sends no word. And the Hindi word for this is bides. And so this is actually a whole species, or I keep saying the word species, which is othering. But what I'm referring to here is like poetry as species of magic. You know, that Kamiko Han uses to talk about magic, talk about poetry, but I think she's also quoting somebody else. So I need to actually go back and find out what that is. So I'm just gonna put a marker there and then like not say the word species anymore. A kind or an incarnation, an avatar, have you, of you know, this myth. I also love the kind of sound of Pia and peace in English, and how that echoes throughout the poem itself. And so the word bides functions as this kind of callback to a type of folk song of being left behind. So there's layers here of aloneness. And you know, reading one chautal after another chautal after another chautal in a collection of poetry is exhausting. And I'll tell you, you know, the translation being a very close way of reading, as a translator, being completely exhausted by this. But you know, as we sit here and we wait through that time of longing, there's a reinterpretation that happens here of the Krishna myth to emulate the pain of separation from the beloved. And I think personally that Sharma reflects on the influence of Mirabai, you know, exactly as the human soul who's longing for the beloved, as Radha does, you know, through the absence. This poem, for me, makes a parallel that can be made through exile and indenture, given the separation between the speaker and the beloved, deepened and made more complex by the circumstances of migration. The speaker's description of longing could refer as much as to the distance between the indentured from their home, as to that between the human and the divine. And that's why, and this is an example of why it was important for me to kind of situate this tradition of chautal singing, of you know, the indentured labor trade, and what that means in terms of a new kind of devotional poetry, where there is this layering of complication that I see happening here. from that poetic tradition. And in my understanding of, let's say, Caribbean poetry, that comes from non-colonial languages, there is this sense of fragmentation and fracture. Or actually, also Caribbean poetry that happens in what Camille Brathwaite would call nation language. This is what we get as well. And so these are just some of the things that I see in this poem. And as you can see, a quick note on the form. The form, all of the Chautals, I've translated to be quatrains, except the ending, which, because of my own ways of thinking about poetic closure and structure, closure with deviance, that's how I would say my own translator's mark is on this poem. A Chautal refers to actually each line having 4 beats in which the syllables coalesce around. And so there's more give in the phonological structure of Bhojpuri and Awadhi than there is in English. As things are written out, they're written out through syllables. Long vowels are shortened to fit the meter and of the line. And so Chautal singers or singers in these languages are able to get away with a little bit more lyrical dexterity than we would necessarily be able to in English if I were to migrate the Chautal form exactly into English here. And so I gave a talk, and Harriet Mullen was in the audience, and afterwards she came up to me and she's like, you didn't translate the form? And I was like, well, I talk a little bit about how I do it in the book, and I do have attention to form, but it's not the exact structure of the original. And she's like, oh, well, maybe someone else can do it then. And I was just kind of like, oh, my heart. But then I was like, yeah, oh, my heart, yeah, for sure. But then she also saw the value of having this be something that's an open text, that my translation was only one emanation. And it kind of blew my mind. I was like, okay, so she listened to me pretty deeply, but this is only my own personal story about this thing. And here, we have a couple more of these. Yeah, and I want to talk about this Chautal. This Chautal on page 119 and in the packet, page 11, where the poet actually kind of flirts with Nirgun Bhakti, the tradition of the formless God. So far in the entire book, we have seen devotion to the God with form, to Krishna specifically, and to Rama. And retelling of Ramayana myth and stories of Hindu mythology, bhakti, devotional Hindu mythology. In this Chautal, we see, my days are ending. I will go to my in-laws' home. People come with a boat and a Brahmin. Go to my beloved and tell him, stop this, come home. My body's sari is spun of love's threads. I put vermilion in my hair, streaked coal on my eyes. 4 men come to lay a palanquin at thy door. Taking me by the arms, they seat me on it. Everyone cries out. My friends begin to weep as they make preparations. Lalbihari says, leaving the world of your parents' home, singing praises to Rama will help. What I see here is I see the use of the name Ram. Rama here, or Rama, Ram, both of these are the name of the incarnation, 7th incarnation of Lord Vishnu, that recalls Kabir. And so here, these are all kinds of sasural songs, or songs that are sung in the Nirgun Bhakti tradition of leaving your body. There's this metaphor of going to your in-laws' home. Marriage was actually such a time of trauma for a woman. She would leave the patriarchy of her father and brothers and belong and be subsumed by the patriarchy of her husband and his family. And this is in North Indian tradition. And this was very much a tradition that The majority of indentured laborers were from what they brought to the Caribbean. It's also a signal to, this kind of oeuvre within that poetic tradition of the Nirgun Bhakti, right? There's also the separation that comes in, which is also exile from, home and the not being able to return. So here we get an idea of what is going on. And so at the very end, leaving the world of your parents' home, singing praises to Rama will help. So remembering your breath, remembering that, we are, as you leave, you melt into formlessness. As you leave this body, you melt into formlessness, right? Which is then emerging again with the God that is formless. So in some ways, Lalbihari Sharma as a poet is also speaking to this tradition, which feels a little bit like shuffled cards to me. But then why is it that we want people to be put into one neat box so we can understand them? What then if like a new kind of Caribbean spirituality from South Asia is syncretic in many ways, but then also inclusive of diverse practices, as new religions and even new languages were being formed and wrought in these plantation communities. And then the last poem of the Chautal that I'll show you today is really firmly in this tradition, and actually, to me, feels like it's speaking from the voice of Kabir. And I'll show you why. Saints and brothers, wake up. Your senses will rob you of your attention. Guard against them day and night. They run away with you and carve great pain without you even knowing. Given the chance, they ruin everything. Sleeping, you will lose all your wealth. Sing praises to Raghunath in this night's darkness. No one will listen to this who doesn't believe their eyes. Lalbihari says, saints and merchants, don't be seduced. In Bhakti tradition, and definitely in the poetry of Kabir, we learn that there is a sense of the body as being antenna to the world, the sensorial world around us, which is all Maya, capital M Maya, which is the world of illusion, the world that we think that we experience, that is not the world. There's only one truth to Krishna, there's only one truth to Kabir, and that is Ram Nam, the name of God, which is the name that lives within you, which is the capital S self. Here we get that kind of energy. Saints and brothers. The address of the word here, sant, that Lalbihari uses in the original, reflects very much the lines of Kabir, who addresses saints. Suno bhai sadhu, like listen to me, brothers. Jagi utkar, like wake up. It's time to wake up. But the waking that is happening is not the waking that is happening is one that is religious or spiritual, and not religious. It's not the waking up of religious recitation and ritual recitation. It's the waking up of the more bhakti or nirgun bhakti kind of enlightenment, of attaining that idea and understanding that everything here is mine. So I've just kind of rushed through the things that I see here. Please, if you do have questions, I would love for you to type them up to me. Or if you want to unmute and interrupt me, that is totally welcome. Because I have one more poem to share with you today. And then I'll get into the translation prompt that I want you to take home. It's like, this is such me. I'm so sorry. This is what I do, right? I'm always like, here's some homework. Please do your homework. But it's, please forgive my enthusiasm for this. So this book of poems, or this songbook, like I said, is broken into 3 sections. The first one, as we saw, was the going through the daily life of an indentured laborer. And the second part of it were the Chautal songs, or the songs that were sung during this kind of performance for Pagwa or Holi. The third section are what they call bhajans. And bhajans are, like I said, they're more like praise songs than hymns, if you're a Protestant and you can understand that metaphor. It's more like the kind of song that you would sing in personal, like a personal kind of prayer than it would be the kind of song that you would sing from, like, you know, a book of worship or what have you, like anything that you would have to like have anything that would have a right time and place. These ones are a little bit more like at the end of any kind of prayer ceremony or at the end of any kind of thing, family gathering or what have you, people will sometimes sing bhajans, these songs of praise. And here's one, you know, that I think merges both of these traditions again. And so here, what I'll do is I'll read it. And the form here is a little bit looser than what's come before in the Chow Pal style as we see it. In the packet, it's on page 13, and in the book, it's on page 149. And it's the fourth bhajan in this cycle. And I believe there are eight or nine bhajans here. Plus eight bhajans, and it ends with you know, a return to the Kavit, the Chaupai, and then the Doha. So Lalbihari writes, illusion's fire lights the mind, believing Rama mere myth. They ring the bells and blow the conch. I try and try to make you see you are going mad. You forget the true house and call it false. Now you can't tell the ruined from the real, the true from the imitation. When this life draws to a close, you will have such regret. You will wander the 84 lakhs of birth and deaths without peace or rest. At the end of time, you will enter Yampur, the city of the dead, alone. Lalbihari is of no use. You are alone and destitute. This whole creation is a dream-like illusion. Sing the only truth of Rama's name. So here I can see the internal conflict of the poet that really wants to believe in a Nirgun tradition, but also finds himself straddling the Sadgun tradition. Illusion's fire lights the mind. The idea of illusion, of Maya, is a tradition in which there's a belief that the only reality is self, is God, is Brahman, not as in the caste, Brahman, but Brahman, the God of the soul, right? The soul God, the thing that connects the collective unconsciousness. Well, I mean, the collective unconscious. Unconsciousness also works, but I mean that God that pervades everything. And the reality is only that God. And so we see here at the end of this poem for sure. At the beginning line, the opening line of this poem, we see that here, and at the end of the poem, we return there. But we move into believing Rama mere myth. They ring bells and blow the conch. That strikes me as being or being part of the devotional poem that is to the God with form. You can't forget the true house and call it false. So Rama as the God of form, who is the true house or the true form, etc., etc. At the end of time, Lalbihari is of no use, you're destitute. This whole creation is a dreamlike illusion. So then my question then would be to, you know, Lalbihari, and so the people of the differing bhakti traditions will answer this question quite differently, but to Lalbihari, if I could meet Lalbihari, my question would be, okay, if all of the world is illusion, then isn't Rama illusion as well? Because it's through the senses of Maya that we understand Rama as separate, right? So then where is that great truth? And so the people with the Sagun Bhakti, the people who believe in God with form, would answer that in a very different way than the people who don't believe in God with form. People who believe in the God with form will say, there is reality that is Maya, but the actual truth is, Krishna or Rama, in that if you are devout to him, he will eventually set you free from this. So you don't actually need to worry about that. The people who are nirgun bhakts, people who are devotees to that tradition of God without form, will say, you're asking the wrong question. There is only Maya. There is only truth. Well, cannot Maya be born of truth? Isn't that idea of a dichotomy something that you're also understanding through Maya? So if I were to meet Lalbihari after reading this book, I would ask him, like, okay, which side do you fall on? Because of that thing. My religious studies teacher, probably like in undergrad, Dr. Vasudha Narayanan, she's interested in like the vernacular text and translation from Tamil into English. She translates these Muslim poems written in Tamil into English. She would say to me that Hinduism is so capacious that both can be true, that it can be it can be inclusive of all of these things. So both of those questions or both is falling on both of those sides actually does make sense. Oh my goodness, I'm looking at the time. I'm so sorry that I'm so long-winded. I think this happens when I get nervous, like I get to talking, and I just let you know that that's my truth. And so I do want you to ask questions. If there's anything that you want to say, anything that you notice, please do feel free to unmute yourself. Oh yes, thank you. Cecile actually asked the question. Could I say something about my decision to use couplets in this bhajan? Yes, I will. Okay, so if I look at the line here in the original, I see that it's cut in half by the use of a comma, and it ends with the double period mark, which is two lines. Typically in the rest of this book, instead of that comma, it would end with just the one line. So in my translation here, I took that structure of the one sentence or the one thought completed by the second thought, the one line and the two line, and they function together as a complete unit, as being two parts of the same thing. And so my idea then was to bring it down underneath. And because I am an American poet, who's totally bewitched by couplets, I thought that most folks would probably like read the couplets and just think them beautiful, as I do, as I'm often bewitched by elements of craft, instead of actually sometimes going deeper. So maybe that's my own kind of illusion that I'm trying to cast over my reader, to be quite honest. And that also, thinking about my own practice of poetry. My new book of poems coming out with 4-way books, which I'm so excited about. I have the galley behind me on my table. I don't know. Am I allowed to show you what it is, Martha? What do you think? Hannah, what do you think? Can I hold it up? Anyway, it's written in couplets mostly, and I'm totally stoked about that. And anyway, that's a part of it too, and I really appreciate that question. Thank you, Hannah, for also talking or posting the link to the donations here. The last thing that I want to show you is the other handout that I've given you, which is a little bit about my decisions as translator in this text, which is asking you to follow my own kind of belief in translation as possible emanation, which I give you the quote that I use here. Put this down. And so basically, I show you an ulara that I've translated, and I'm not going to read it out to you. You can read it when you're free. But here's an example of a translation that I did, and what I did was horribly transgressive, and only because this is bilingual that I feel comfortable doing this, because I think of the fact of people being able to move forward with that. And with that in mind, I give you the actual language gloss for the ways that I've chosen to do this. So here is the actual poem in how I've written it out into I've transliterated it into a Roman language, a Roman script. So we have Shiva Shiva Japata So Mana Ananda, Shiva Shiva Japata So Mana Ananda, Adi Deva Shankara Jano, Adi Deva Shankara Jano, Anga Babhuta Bhala Parachanda, Anga Babhuta Bhala Parachanda, Shiva Shiva Japatta So Mana Ananda. And so here we have, a brief language gloss. If you have time, and if you're so interested, I'd like to see how you would do this yourself, because of the fact of it being so incredibly personal. Like I say, how will you attend to sound? How will you attend to rhythm? Fully aware that this was meant to be performed, and then migrating that kind of tradition or that kind of idea into a new kind of space of performance, which is the blank page, which, in my little spiel in the beginning, you'll see. So do with that as you will. And thank you so much for the gift of your presence here. There's a question from Kathy MacArthur Palermo. I keep going back to the Chautal poem. Are there more poems in this woman's voice? Is this particular poem connected to Mendi? This particular poem is so sorrowful about a woman losing identity. Just wondering if there are some joyful ones. Yeah, I was lucky to attend a friend's 4-day wedding 2 years ago and witnessed the vermilion in hair, the streaked coal. The poem brings it back to me, but of course, that was more joyful. So yeah, I want to talk about joy. Actually, thank you so much for that comment. As a matter of fact, in this book, there are these joyful poems of the gods playing holy, of a beer, of that kind of exuberance. These ones of longing, yeah, you're right about that. This says something, this betrays something about my own psychology, perhaps, that all of my examples were really sad. I guess I should have warned folks, but maybe, like as I said, subconsciously, I will say that there is exuberance there, and it's interesting to bring up Mendi, because there are these poems are written by a man in the voice of a woman, which is one of the bhakti poems, bhavas or traditions or affective reservoir feeling things. And so, the things that I mentioned, the vermilion, the coal, there's actually mehendi in the book as well. And these are called the 16 adornments of a woman after she weds. She becomes more auspicious. I don't know how, but according to this worldview, a woman becomes more auspicious through marriage, and one of the ways is through these adornments. Armbands, bracelets, a nose ring, a bindi, the vermilion in the part, the rings, toe rings, anklets, mehendi. And these are just some. There's like a kamarband. Kamarband is actually a Hindi word, and it's a tie that goes around the waist, which is also one of the beautiful things. Anyway, so these are some of those things. But anyway, thank you also for the gift of your presence here today, and for your patience, and for your love of poetry and your love of four-way books, because I really do feel at home here with you all today. So thank you so much.
I think we can all unmute ourselves to clap. Thank you so much. That just absolutely blew my mind. I'm so stunned by that. So we can stay on the line to talk for a few minutes, but we will now have a 30-minute break before Cami Thomas's next seminar on the Odyssey. So we'll use the same link if anyone logs off to get some water or stretch your legs. But yes, feel free to chat now.
Thank you all so much. This has been wonderful.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Rajiv, do you want to show us your galley?
Oh, can I? Oh my God, I'm so excited. I've been working on this book of poems for forever, and it has the best home in the world.
Oh,
look at how sleek. It's just
beautiful.
I know, I've always wanted a white book. And check it out, as I said, the couplets. Oh my God, the layout is just, it's superb.
Beautiful.
Oh my God. September. Yeah, September 2021.
It's great. How about other translators here? I know Dan and Abby. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but Are there others who have worked in translation?
I have Spanish.
Spanish?
With Nicaraguan, and some other Latin American countries. Yeah. So, I appreciate that. Your comments about trying to get to the original poem, but also there are variations.
Rajiv, were there friends, colleagues that you had to, not had to, but found yourself working with, or tearing your hair out with, just like over this? What was the process like?
Yeah, I mean, like, as you all know, like, the translation is more like, I think this is right, until like you have your reader friends be like, yeah, but have you considered this word? So I had a couple of friends like that, and one of my friends who actually speaks Trinidadian Bhojpuri, who poured through this book, and did not love, and he's not a literary translator. So he read through the book to look for consistencies of the ways that I've translated it. And, he was not a big fan of the way that I, really riffed on the text. And so that was a really fun kind of animated many conversations that we've had, be like, why are you shortening the name of Krishna to this? When Krishna has like so many different names, Shiva has so many different names. Why are you calling him so simply Krishna when he's like, the god of the Giridhar mountain? Why not have that echo of Mirabai? So there's that aspect of it, and then there's like the other aspect of it, of people who are poets, who I was like, hey, could you read this? Does this sound like a poem in English, or is this still in translationese? And so that was one of the things concerning all of the grammatical structures that were like, about deferring meaning in the original, because what would happen in the first part of the couplet, let's say, would be all of this kind of information that's finally organized by the verb in the end of the sentence, that we wouldn't understand how it was organized till we get to that verb, and then it's like this like small amount of like joy that we feel, as readers. And so I've had friends be like, okay, this works here, this does not work here. And particularly in the ularas, the translation prompt that I gave you, that was the most problematic thing for me personally, and the most kind of like outside of the, I think people would probably if they're going to take issue with this translation, that's one of the first things I think that folks will take issue with. So.
It might be cool to, I don't know, it might be cool to either orally or in written form take one piece and sort of go through that dialogue or that process. I don't know, we could think about that, just as if it, I always like to hear people talk about places where they're stumbling in their own work, and I think it would be interesting to hear about that process in translation, also in that enterprise. So something that we might task you to do.
Yeah, that would be a great essay, actually.
Yeah, I think it could be cool.
Because you're right, it's like, it's not a simple process. Like it's not the final realization is never quite final, and like, what are the issues that you encounter? It's like breaking it down on the mechanical level even would be so good to read of other folks, to be like, this is your issue here. And since this language is so like socially distant, now in today's day and age, we can't really say social distance without thinking of survival.
Sure.
But like the distance between like this kind of language in time and contemporary American poetry, it's like, also, how do you navigate that? And I found myself like wondering about that.
This is perhaps an incredibly mechanical question, but I think the reason this would be a great essay or podcast, as Martha mentioned, is I was curious when you said that that you were approaching kind of like a proto-language, or like the kind of like transitional fossil of languages merging. How did you do that? Like, how did you, I don't know, like learn back and then figure out, yeah. I'm not a
Yeah.
translator, so I'm just like riveted by that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for this question, because like, and I think that's like one of the beauties of this book is that, like I called it a proto-Guyanese Bhojpuri, meaning that, when folks came to the plantations, they spoke a various amalgamation of North Indian languages, Bhojpuri, Brajbhasha, Awadhi, Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali. And so they came up with a lingua franca. Eventually, like after a generation that became, Guyanese Hindustani, which is a kind of, they call it a Koinized language, but think of it as a Creole language, but just not in the language of colonization. So it was in their, it has like grammatical structure of Bhojpuri with elements from other places. And so what I see happening in this text is this guy trying to write in Brajbhasha, which is the language of Mirabai, and in Awadhi, which is the language of Tulsidas and Kabir. And so there's some grammatical configurations that are in Awadhi and some that are in Bhojpuri, and actually some that are in Urdu. Because Hindi and Urdu are very close, and because I'm probably the most educated in Hindi, I was able to, that part was really easy. The other thing was that the Caribbean Hindustani language that my family speaks is like 2 generations after this, which means that it's shifted so much than this original thing. So I sat with dictionaries from Brajbhasha, from Awadhi, from Bhojpuri, and I was cross-checking like over and over and over again, because even the way that the verbs are conjugated changed based on whatever the language of origin it was from. So, so it would be interesting also as a translation project to translate this into contemporary Caribbean Hindustani.
I say that sounds like etymological Sudoku.
Yeah,
It's so difficult.
Oh, actually, I have these. So last time I was in Guyana, I went to a couple of stores and I picked up these, I picked up these other contemporary Chowtal books, and these are being published now. And so this one was published in the early 2000s in New York City, in Parkside Hills, Queens. And so you see how it's just kind of put together and it's stapled, and then you can see the way that what they do now is they have the Devanagari written here, and then they have the transliteration, but no actual translation here. And I was like, maybe a next translation project. And I'm like, translation, it's like, I love it. But it's so painful. It's like such close reading. And I do get joy out of it. And I don't mean to say that I don't get joy out of it, but like, it's, a lot of sleepless nights thinking about single words, and another 10 years spent on, this little pamphlet. I don't know about that. I have other poems to write.